And he says, I'm going to give you 3 more symbols to teach you how, to show you how faith in the bitter herbs, faith in the unleavened bread, faith in the lamb will get you to a place where all things become new. So I want to talk real briefly about the bitter herbs. So it says in verse 8, you shall eat the meat of the lamb, you shall eat it with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. So the bitter herbs, it's to remind you of slavery in Egypt. Every single Seder meal, when Rick Weintraub is leading through that and you get the horseradish and you eat a bite of it, it just pops you. It's bitter. And the Jewish people, oftentimes when they do a Seder meal, they'll have horseradish, they'll have parsley, and they'll have endive. All of them intended to pop you, to make it hurt, to feel the bitterness of those herbs. And Rick will say, listen, when you eat these, it's to remind the Jewish people of the bitterness of their slavery, which always struck me. Why do they need to be reminded of the bitterness of their slavery? It doesn't say remind them of their slavery. It says remind them of the bitterness of their slavery. And there's a side where I'm going, why do you need to be reminded of the bitterness of slavery? Just being reminded of slavery is bitter enough, right? I mean, like, surely I didn't forget until I read my Old Testament and I realize how often the nation of Israel forgot the bitterness of their slavery. You travel around with them in the Pentateuch. That's the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Go reread those books and see how many times the nation of Israel said, oh, that we could go back to Egypt. Because at least there we had food, and at least there we had a home to live in. We weren't wandering around eating all this quail and manna. Oh, that we could go back. Completely forgetting all the bitterness of their slavery that made them cry out, oh, God, help us. And it's interesting. Human nature is such that we forget the bitterness of our brokenness so quickly. But until we grow bitter with the broken state we're in, we'll never long for change. Probably the clearest way many of us recognize something like that is with our own weight. There are some of you, you're like me. I'm a yo-yo person, up and down, up and down, up and down. I've been that way. I was a chubby kid, always struggled with weight. I look at a Twinkie, I gain 2 pounds. It's just on me all the time. I work out harder than anybody. I eat better than anybody, and I'm half as in shape as the people in this room. It's just the way it is for me. Always been that way. And there was about 2 years ago, I was just slowly doing the creep, about a pound a month over a couple of years, didn't even realize it. And I looked up and I was over 20 pounds heavier than I was a couple of years before. But it was so slow, I didn't really notice it. I mean, I knew my belt fit a little tighter. I knew my clothes weren't just quite right. But I just kept eating my Twinkies, man. I'm just enjoying life. Until one day, I watched a video of me preaching. And I said, is that what I look like? Holy cajoles. And in that moment, my weight became bitter to me. And I said, this shall not stand. And from that moment, I said, baby, I'm changing my diet. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to start training for a marathon. I'm going to get in shape. This is not okay. It was only when it was not okay that I began to change. When I grew bitter with my broken state and broken body, where I didn't want to have diabetes, I didn't want to have issues, I wanted to be in shape, that's when I started to make a change. You have to grow bitter before you're ever going to make a change. And let me tell you why that matters. Until you grow bitter with your broken state, you will never be ready for God to change you. And let me go ahead and tell you, you are broken just like me. We are born slaves. And it might not be a physical slavery that we would see, but it is a spiritual slavery. The Word of God is clear. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Every single one of us are slaves to sin. What does that mean? It means that we are driven around by our selfish passions, our lusts, our cravings, the things that we want to have for ourselves. We are driven, owned by them. This is why we keep hurting ourselves and everyone else around us. It's inexplicable. We keep hurting every relationship. Our children are hurt by our sin. Our spouse is hurt by our sin. Every relation, our job is hurt. Our finances are hurt. Our health is hurt by our sin. We're slaves to these cravings. We don't know why we keep going back to porn. We don't know why we keep going back to another drink and another drink. We don't know why we keep spending money that we don't have. We don't know why we keep doing this, because we're slaves to these cravings inside of us. We're slaves. But the truth is we can acclimate to that and go, this is just who I am. You know, and I'm just always going to be the angry type that explodes at people. Nothing I can do about it. I'm just always going to struggle with pornography. There's just nothing I can do about it. Look, I'm just naturally addictive by nature. I'm always going to struggle with alcohol. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm always going to fill in the blank. And we acclimate to our slavery, and we're no longer bitter with it. And what I've been praying over you guys is that today would be the day that you say, no more. This is not okay. This life I've been living, the people I've been hurting, the way I've been self-destructing, it's not okay with me. I want you to grow bitter with your broken state. Because when you grow bitter with who you are, that's when faith begins to kick in to say, I think there can be something new. I don't want to be where I used to be. I want to be new. It creates a longing in you for change. That's what the bitter herbs are supposed to remind you. Be bitter about your brokenness. But the moment you are, that'll lead you to the next domino that needs to fall, the unleavened bread.